Hello, welcome to Excel, and today we are talking about pivot tables. Pivot tables are a term that you probably aren't familiar with, but are actually probably one of the more important data management functions that Excel contains. Now, we've done a little bit of stuff that would be useful to have a pivot table do by using functions and that sort of thing. So you'll remember in previous lessons we've done things like filtering. So for example, we want to filter by shipping method. We could have only delivery truck, for example, ship modes, or express air, or whatever. There's lots of different ways that you can filter your table to find or filter your entire data set to show off something that you're trying to compare, or just specific pieces of data instead of being overwhelmed by this giant, massive 8,400 line spreadsheet. Now, when we want to go beyond filters, which you often do, filters are nice for sort of like just quickly looking into things. We can talk about pivot tables. So pivot tables basically create a whole new table based on the data that you've provided, and it does its best to find an easy way for you to view and understand that data. So there's a couple of different ways that you can add a pivot table. So we're talking about inserting something. As always, we go to the insert bar and we have pivot tables. So we can insert a pivot table and it asks us what is the range of our data. So right now it has selected every cell that contains information. So this is A1, which is all the way at the top left, to U8400, which is all the way at the bottom right. And it asks you, do you want to add this to an existing worksheet, or do you want to add it to a new one? Alternatively, you can do recommended pivot tables. And this is where it's going to, and this is probably a great place to start, but this is where it's going to give you some ideas of what headings you should use and all that jazz. So we're not going to do that just now, we'll get to it shortly. But I'm just going to select all of my data. We're going to create a new table, and it's going to be on a new worksheet. So here's our pivot table. There's nothing in it. It's empty. But over here on the right hand side we have our pivot table fields. So this is kind of like creating a filter, and what it wants us to do is tell us what data it needs to show. So let's say let's do shipping mode, because we've done shipping mode before. We're going to select shipping mode. So now it's got a teeny tiny little table. And let's say we want to do profit by shipping mode. Now we've done this before by doing a conditional what do you call it, formula. So we did the sum if function, where we went sum if, and we selected all this, and if it was equal to regular air, then add all the. So basically what's happening is Excel is doing this for us really, really, really quickly, and creating a little table for us, which is quite nifty. Now, the great thing too here is that I can add more data to this and it will automatically reorganize. So let's say I now want to subdivide those sales into region. So now I can see, first of all, I can minimize this so that it looks as it did before. I can see what my profit was, or by delivery type, but now I can expand that and to see how much profit each region made by that delivery type. So things are getting a little bit more complex. Now down here we have sort of the sorting method that the pivot table is using. So right now my rows are shipping mode and profit. Okay, or sorry, shipping mode and region. So rows being the horizontal part. So you have our shipping mode, which is delivery truck, and then it's creating a sub row underneath each of them, which is region. Now I can actually shift the region up, and now it's going to reorganize my table so that each region can look at its various profit um, by delivery method. Okay, so that's really actually quite useful. So and then let's see, maybe we can add something else. What might be another useful? What would be another useful one? Let's get rid of shipping mode and region. We'll keep profit, but now we're going to go to product category and product subcategory, which this is awesome. I mean, if we go over to our orders here and we look at product category, product subcategory, and product name, all this information is actually in here. Now before, we've never even bothered looking at this because it's all just a wash of general information. But now when we see it in our pivot table, we have furniture and we can tell how much profit. Look at Superstore has lost $33,000 over the period of time that this workbook looks at. They've lost $33,000 on bookcases and almost $100,000 in profit lost on selling tables. So maybe Superstore should stop selling those things, or maybe they should market them better, and they wouldn't take such a heavy loss. So as you can see, this is starting to have some value to someone who might be analyzing some data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this sheet. Delete. And I'm now going to use a recommended pivot table. So what does Excel think we should do? We could do profit by region, sales by region, profit by order of priority. Okay, so that's the order of priority of the delivery types. Profit by shipping mode, which we already did. Sum of ID count, row ID. Now this is not a useful one. So basically, I'm going to slide over here. So we have row ID and order ID. These are just numeric values that are being given to these orders as to how they might appear in another database. So if I'm going recommended tables and it's showing me sum of order ID, it's actually adding these numbers up. That's not at all useful. Or this one's counting how many rows fit into Atlantic, how many individual sales. So not a great pivot table. Sum of discount, sum of unit price, and shipping costs. So the further down the list that we go, we're getting a little bit less and less functional. Oh, this one might be a little bit more useful. Well, the order ID is not useful. But the sum of sales, the product base margin, again, not very useful. But so this is Excel has done some great pivot tables for us here. And as you go further down the list, you're just getting things that are less and less useful. But Excel's trying, and this is a great starting point, right? So we can start off with our regions. So a quick OK, and then again it brings us back to a pivot table field. So this is, like I said, a very useful tool when you're using large data sets and you need to create subsets of that data in one way or another. So I encourage you to play around with this and see what kind of interesting things you can find. The last thing we'll talk about is why this is actually called a pivot table. So I'm going to move my table over here and auto expand my cells. So we've got sales summed by region, and let's do a sub by shipping mode. So the reason that they call this a pivot table is because you can actually cause the table to pivot on itself. You can change where the rows are and where the columns are. Now this doesn't work for every single move. Like as you can see, I'm trying to make some moves around here, and it's having none of it. But what I can do is pivot right inside of my table. Now that's not useful at all. let's see about this. Okay, so now I've created columns by region. So instead of having like Atlantic having a sub level for delivery truck and express air and regular air and that sort of thing, now I've actually got a grand total for each, an individual total for each uh, delivery type, and then an absolute grand total sum of sales. So that the reason why they call this a pivot table is because we can move the headings around and the table can flip on its side or change directions all over the place and end up with a completely different view, which might have more function. So spend some time playing around with pivot tables, because from there we are going to go into something a little bit more interesting. So make sure you've got a pivot table set up in its own sheet, okay, before we go on, and save that document to your OneNote. And that's it for this lesson. See you next time.